It never announces itself with noise. It comes quietly, almost gently, like a shadow slipping under the door. A smile that lingers a moment too long. A laugh with a trace of something sharp in it. A shift in the air you can't quite name, but feel in your chest. These are the earliest forms of disrespect, so small that most people will tell themselves it's nothing. They'll call it harmless. They'll call it a joke. They'll call it not worth making a fuss over. And that is exactly how it grows, because disrespect is not born in grand displays. It begins in whispers. It tests you in the smallest ways to see if the door is open, if you will notice, if you will push back. The first time, it is not even about you personally. It is about the principle. The person testing you might not even be aware they're doing it. But instinct drives people to probe for weakness, and when they find no resistance, they learn something far more dangerous than any insult. They learn you will allow it. The truth is simple and merciless. Disrespect ignored is disrespect approved. Every time you let it pass, you sign a silent agreement that it may happen again. And once you've signed that agreement, you no longer control the terms of engagement. They do. That is why the most dangerous moment is not the loud confrontation in front of a crowd, but the quiet, forgettable moment that everyone else moves past. It is in that moment, when no one is watching and no one will defend you, that the real decision is made. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. Respect is not something you earn over time through kindness or patience. Respect is enforced from the beginning, in the first exchange, in the first breath after the first test. Once you give someone a reason to think you will tolerate disrespect, every interaction afterward becomes a negotiation for your dignity. And in that negotiation, the price always rises. Most people think the right move is to avoid conflict until it becomes unavoidable. They tell themselves they are choosing peace. In reality, they are choosing to let the other side build momentum. By the time they act, the pattern is set. The audience has learned how to read them, and the damage to their standing is already done. The wise know the battle for respect is won or lost long before the first loud insult. It is decided in the smallest moment, when you either draw the line or let it fade into the floor. If you let it fade, you will spend twice the energy and 4 times the time trying to redraw it later. That is the price of hesitation in the economy of power. And in this economy, the first violation is the cheapest it will ever be. That is why the Machiavellian mind never waits for the storm. It moves at the whisper. It answers the first test, not with noise, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. The kind of stillness that makes the other person realize they have stepped into a place they do not understand. Stillness is not inaction. Stillness is the gathering of control. And in the game of power, control is worth more than any word you could speak. It begins with something you could ignore if you wanted to. A pause before your name is spoken. A smirk that appears the moment you finish speaking. A quiet exchange of glances between others, as if you weren't meant to notice. These are the moments most people step over without thinking, telling themselves they imagined it, convincing themselves they are being too sensitive. They avoid the discomfort of acknowledgement, because acknowledgement forces choice, and choice forces conflict. But in reality, the conflict has already begun. Disrespect rarely arrives in its final form. It grows in stages, in layers, in subtle increments that feel too small to fight over, but are, in truth, the foundation for everything that will follow. That first slight is not random. It is an opening probe, a way to measure you, to see if you are paying attention, if you will assert yourself, or if you will pretend not to notice. It is not even always conscious on their part, but instinct knows the truth long before reason does. Boundaries that are invisible are boundaries that do not exist. This is the danger of letting the first violation pass without consequence. It is not just a missed opportunity to defend yourself, it is a public declaration of your limits. You teach not only the one who crossed you, but every silent observer in the room how far you can be pushed before you push back. And the lesson spreads faster than you think. The next offense will not feel as small. It will be sharper, louder, more public. And when you finally react, you will be reacting to a pattern you silently agreed to when it was still in its weakest form. Machiavelli understood that the first violation is the cheapest it will ever be. Correct it early, and it costs you nothing but a glance, a pause, a shift in energy. Leave it unchallenged, and correcting it later will cost you leverage, reputation, and the perception that you are unshakable. That is why the wise never let the first moment pass without a response, not a dramatic one, but a decisive one. The untrained mind waits until disrespect becomes undeniable before acting, believing this shows restraint or maturity. The trained mind knows that waiting only strengthens the other side's position. Every unchallenged slight is like a brick laid against you. By the time you move to tear the wall down, it will have been built high enough that you will need to fight uphill to reclaim what was once yours by default. The first violation is not about the words or gestures themselves. It is about the implication they carry. And implications left unanswered harden into assumptions. Assumptions become habits. Habits become law. If you do not break the chain at its first link, you will be forced to face it when it is wrapped tightly around you. So when that first violation comes, you do not wait for the right moment, because the right moment is now. You do not meet it with anger, because anger is a loss of control. You do not try to explain, because explanation is a request for understanding, and requests place you beneath the one you are addressing. Instead, you meet it with a subtle but undeniable change in posture, in tone, in the energy you give them. You let them feel that the moment they chose has consequences they cannot name but cannot ignore. The first violation is where the war for respect is either won quietly or lost permanently. And if you are wise, you will remember that no one else will fight this battle for you. The choice is yours alone, and the silence you keep or break in that moment will decide whether they see you as untouchable or open ground. The first violation demands a response, but not the kind most people are trained to give. The average reaction is fueled by emotion, anger, defensiveness, a need to justify or explain. This instinct is natural, but in the game of power, it is fatal. Emotional reaction tells the offender that they have control over your state. It confirms that their words or actions reached you, that they could disturb your composure. And once someone knows they can do that, they will do it again, because the fastest way to dominate a person is to control their emotions. Machiavelli's first law in handling disrespect is as simple as it is merciless. The person who reacts emotionally loses status. The person who withdraws strategically becomes unpredictable. And unpredictability is the seed of fear. This is where most people misunderstand silence. They think it means ignoring the slight entirely, pretending it didn't happen, or laughing it off to appear above it. That is not silence. That is surrender wrapped in politeness. True controlled silence is an active act of power. It is the deliberate withdrawal of your energy from the exchange, the sudden refusal to participate in the rhythm the offender is trying to create. It is a hard pause, a break in the current that forces them to feel the absence of your engagement. When you choose controlled silence, you are not retreating. You are shifting the battlefield from their arena to yours. Every power exchange has a tempo, and disrespect relies on speed. It relies on the jab, the quick remark, the stolen moment before anyone can respond. When you go still, When you refuse to give them what they came for, you don't just slow the tempo, you freeze it. You create a black hole in the conversation, a gravitational void that pulls attention toward the absence of your response. People feel it instantly. The offender feels it most. They expected laughter, defensiveness, maybe even an insult in return. What they get instead is the weight of your gaze, the deliberate stillness of your posture, and the cold awareness that you are no longer feeding their attempt to rise at your expense. The power of controlled silence lies in the tension it creates. Tension makes people uncomfortable, and most will rush to break it, often by backtracking, softening their words, or changing the subject. You allow this to happen without granting them the relief of knowing they've succeeded in erasing the moment. Because you haven't erased it, you've marked it, and that mark will sit in their mind long after the conversation moves on. Machiavelli understood that fear doesn't always come from threat or punishment. Sometimes it comes from the unknown. When you respond without emotion, without clarity of intent, you become unreadable. And the unreadable are dangerous because no one can prepare for them. A person who knows what you will do can plan around you. A person who cannot predict, you must tread lightly. In silence, you plant the seed of uncertainty, and uncertainty reshapes behavior far more effectively than confrontation ever could. But controlled silence is not passive. It requires a precise kind of presence. You cannot look away nervously or fidget as though you are avoiding the issue. You hold your ground. You maintain eye contact if appropriate. Your body language remains steady, neither inviting nor rejecting, simply present. You don't need to explain how you feel. You let the absence of reaction say what words never could. I am not moved by you. This alone dismantles the offender's attempt to gain ground. The moment you choose this kind of silence, the power dynamic changes. You are no longer playing defense. You have shifted the pressure back onto them. They are left wondering how much you noticed, how much you will remember, and what you might do with it. That wondering is your weapon. Because power does not always require immediate action. Often, it is built in the waiting, in the moments where the other person realizes they've done something they can't take back, and they don't yet know how or when the consequence will arrive. Controlled silence is not about letting things slide. It is about choosing the exact moment when your move will have the greatest impact. And the first step to reaching that moment is making them feel, in the space between their offense and your next words, that they may have just made a mistake they cannot undo. Silence shifts the terrain, but silence alone is not the end game. Controlled stillness buys you space. It creates a pause in which they begin to wonder, in which the balance of energy tips toward you. But once you have created that pause, the next move is to decide whether the moment should be closed quietly or cut open in a way that reveals them to themselves and to everyone watching. This is where surgical exposure begins. Most people who disrespect you expect one of two things. They expect you to react emotionally, or they expect you to brush it off entirely. Both serve them. An emotional reaction makes you look unsteady. Brushing it off makes you look weak. What they almost never expect is calm precision, the act of holding their words in the air and making them answer for them without giving them the emotional fuel they were searching for. You do this not by lecturing, not by defending yourself, and not by insulting them in return. You do it through questions, delivered with a voice so steady it feels deliberate, with a gaze that does not waver. Questions like, "Did you mean to say it that way?" Or, "Are you sure you want to repeat that?" Or, "That sounded personal. Do you want to clarify before I respond?" Each of these is a blade, not swung wildly, but placed with precision. You are not arguing. You are inviting them to double down in full view of everyone present. You are making their aggression public without raising your voice. If they repeat themselves, they now own the offense openly. If they backtrack, they've already begun to concede ground. Either way, you have forced them into a position they did not plan for, a position where they must either confirm their intent or retreat. Surgical exposure works because it collapses the shield. Most disrespect hides behind the shield of informality, of just joking, of plausible deniability. When you put their words under the light in real time, you strip that shield away. They are forced to either stand by the violation or admit they were wrong without you ever saying they were wrong. And in the economy of power, forcing your opponent to correct themselves without you having to prove anything is one of the highest forms of dominance. This method also sends a message to the room. It tells everyone watching that you are not baited into emotion, that you do not tolerate veiled shots, and that you will expose subtle disrespect with the same clarity as obvious disrespect. People remember this far longer than a loud argument. They remember the discomfort in the air when you ask the question. They remember the hesitation, the stumble, the change in tone. And they remember that you created that shift without raising your volume or breaking your composure. The key is restraint. You do not fire this weapon every time someone crosses a line. You choose moments where exposure will shift the power dynamic, not just with the offender, but with the entire audience. You do it when you want the message to echo. Because surgical exposure is not about winning a single exchange. It is about altering the way others calculate their approach to you from that moment on. Once you've used it, you don't chase the outcome. You don't try to smooth the air or explain your intent. You let the discomfort do the work for you. Because discomfort is the first sign that the balance has changed. And if you hold your position, it will settle in your favor without you lifting another finger. Exposure is the cut, but the wound is only useful if you prevent it from healing on the wrong terms. This is where most people fail. They believe that once the moment has passed, once the offender has retreated or the air has cooled, they can go back to normal. They try to smooth over the tension, to signal that everything is fine, to show that they are the bigger person. They think this will earn them respect. It does not. It only tells the offender that the consequence was temporary, that the door is still cracked open, and that with time, they can walk right back through it. Machiavelli understood that the moment after a confrontation is the most dangerous moment of all. It is not enough to meet disrespect with silence or exposure. You must redefine the terms of the relationship immediately. If the interaction returns to its old rhythm, you have undone your own work. The old rhythm is what allowed the offense to happen in the first place. If you do not change the rhythm, you have not changed the power dynamic. You have simply paused it. The reset is subtle, but its effect is unmistakable. You adjust the way you speak to them. Shorter sentences, cleaner tones, no unnecessary warmth. You shift your body language. Measured, still, present, but without the openness you once allowed. You do not offer small talk. You do not volunteer help. You do not lean in when they speak. You stop making space for them in your energy, not with hostility, but with precision. The change is quiet, but it is total. If the offense happened in public, the reset becomes a performance for the entire room. You are not acting for attention. You are acting for memory. You want every witness to notice that the air between you and the offender has changed. They should feel the cold edge in your presence, the absence of the easy familiarity that once existed. This is not to create drama. It is to educate. Because in the realm of power, people learn how to treat you, not by what you say, but by what you allow to linger. A true frame reset doesn't require an announcement. You do not need to tell them that something has changed. You let them feel it. You let them wonder if they have lost something they cannot get back. And if they ask, If they try to close the gap, you do not explain. You simply maintain the new frame until it becomes the only version they know. This is how you turn a single act of disrespect into a permanent shift in the relationship. You are not punishing. You are restructuring. You are making it clear, without ever declaring it, that access to you is conditional, that every interaction is subject to your terms, and that those terms are not negotiable. In Machiavelli's world, public punishment was never just about the offender. It was about the audience. The reset serves the same function. You are not simply re-establishing your boundary with one person. You are showing everyone who might consider testing you that the cost is not a single tense moment, but a permanent change in how you engage. And once they see that you do not return to normal after a violation, the calculation shifts. Testing you stops being a game. It becomes a gamble. The reset is the quiet transformation of the battlefield. Before it, you were accessible, familiar, perhaps even easy to read. After it, you are an unknown quantity. And in power, the unknown is respected long before it is understood. Once the frame is reset, the offender begins to understand that something has shifted. But understanding alone is not enough. If the cost of their violation feels light, if it feels equal to the offense, they will eventually test the line again. This is why Machiavelli never built his strategies on fairness. Fairness is a moral luxury. In power, the goal is not to make the punishment fit the crime. It is to make the memory of the punishment so heavy that no one dares to create another. An equal consequence is forgettable. A disproportionate consequence is unforgettable. This does not mean uncontrolled rage or reckless retaliation. It means designing a response whose weight far exceeds the initial offense, not to inflict damage for its own sake, but to rewire the cost-benefit calculation in the mind of the offender and everyone watching. They must walk away from the moment, not just regretting their words, but realizing that even a small attempt at disrespect will have a cost far beyond what they anticipated. The art lies in execution. If the disrespect was delivered in public, your response should land in public as well, but not through shouting, not through insults. Instead, you deny them something they value in front of others: your warmth, your engagement, your inclusion. They make a remark in a group conversation. You turn your attention elsewhere. They ask you a direct question. You answer with the fewest words possible and then move on without inviting follow-up. They attempt to re-enter your space. You give them the social equivalent of a closed door, polite, civil, but cold enough that the absence of connection is unmistakable. If the offense was private, the consequence can be quieter, but no less sharp. You reduce access. You delay responses. You stop initiating contact. You remove small privileges they once took for granted. And you do it without announcing that it is happening. This way, they are left to connect the dots themselves, and the uncertainty of not knowing how far the consequence will extend becomes part of the punishment. The key is to remain emotionally still while delivering it. You do not look angry. You do not sound bitter. You do not appear hurt. You simply act as though the dynamic has been permanently altered. And in truth, it has. People are far more unsettled by cold removal than by open aggression, because removal forces them to face their own irrelevance. You are not trying to defeat them. You are showing them, with precision, that they have lost access to something they cannot replace. Machiavelli knew that in the game of power, consequences are not just about correction. They are about education. A disproportionate consequence teaches the offender, and it teaches the audience. Those watching learn that testing you is not worth the risk, not because you might argue or lash out, but because you will erase them from the spaces they once occupied. And erasure in the social arena is a fate far more damaging than a verbal blow. You are not looking to humiliate for the sake of cruelty. You are shaping the environment so that the cost of violation is not measured in words or apologies, but in a loss of privilege so significant that no one watching will want to pay it. And once you have made that lesson clear, you no longer need to defend your boundaries. They will be defended by the memory of what happened the last time someone crossed them. In the game of power, you are never dealing with just one person. Every exchange happens under the eyes of others, whether they are in the room, hear about it later, or feel its ripple through the social current. The way you handle a single act of disrespect is not just about correcting the offender. It is about shaping your image in the minds of everyone watching. And Machiavelli understood that image often outweighs truth. People do not act on the full story. They act on the story they believe. When you respond with controlled silence, with surgical exposure, with a disproportionate consequence, you are not only sending a message to the one who crossed you, you are teaching the audience how to think about you. You are crafting an association. They will remember that when you were tested, you did not react in chaos. You did not plead your case. You did not make a scene. You shifted the entire dynamic with minimal effort and maximum effect. And that memory becomes a filter through which they will interpret every future interaction with you. The audience effect works in layers. First, it deters others from crossing you. If they have witnessed the cost of disrespect, they will avoid creating a similar moment, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. Second, it increases your value in their eyes. In social hierarchies, those who can command respect without demanding it are seen as rarer and therefore more valuable. Third, it redefines your presence. You are no longer just a participant in the group. You are a fixed point that others adjust themselves around. This shift is not about fear in the crude sense. It is about influence. People become careful with their words around you, not because they expect to be punished, but because they have learned that your attention is not guaranteed. They become precise in how they address you, because they understand that your respect cannot be bought with flattery or familiarity. It can only be maintained through consistent recognition of your boundaries. The beauty of the audience effect is that it multiplies over time. One decisive handling of disrespect will echo far beyond the moment itself. People will tell the story, sometimes directly, sometimes in passing. They don't tolerate that kind of thing. You only get one chance with them. Careful with your words around them. These phrases circulate quietly, and soon they form the unwritten law of your presence. This is how your reputation begins to protect you in rooms you have not yet entered. Machiavelli knew that rulers who relied on constant displays of force eventually exhausted their resources. The smarter move was to cultivate an image that discouraged defiance before it began. Once you have the audience effect working in your favor, you no longer have to respond to every challenge. The memory of your past responses does the work for you. In this way, your image becomes a silent enforcer, an extension of your will that operates without your direct involvement. But this only works if you are consistent. The audience is always watching for patterns. If you enforce a boundary once and then abandon it later, the story changes. You go from being the person who cannot be crossed to the person who can be crossed if the timing is right. And once that narrative takes hold, it is harder to reverse than it was to build in the first place. This is why, in the aftermath of a public offense, your posture, your tone, your availability must remain aligned with the message you sent in the moment. The audience effect is not built in a single strike. It is built in the days and weeks after, when people see whether you meant what you projected. If your frame holds, your image solidifies. And once solidified, it becomes one of the most powerful shields you will ever possess. Most people will only test you once. They see the consequence, they feel the shift in your presence, and they adjust. But there is a smaller, more dangerous group who will not stop. These are the persistent provocateurs, the ones who test boundaries not out of ignorance, but out of habit, ego, or a deep compulsion to destabilize others. They thrive on disruption. They are less interested in winning than in pulling you into a game you didn't choose to play. Machiavelli would never waste time trying to reform these people. He would not appeal to their sense of decency, because in his eyes, decency was never the driving force of human behavior. He understood that some players in the game of power are not there to build or hold ground. They are there to see how much ground they can steal without paying for it. Against these people, standard boundaries are not enough. You must turn their aggression into a liability they cannot afford. The first step is recognition. Persistent provocateurs will often disguise their tests as harmless. A joke with just enough bite to be felt. A subtle exclusion disguised as oversight. A question loaded with implication, but framed as curiosity. They are probing not just for your reaction, but for your consistency. They want to know if the image you project is a mask or a true position. And if they find a crack, they will widen it. The second step is inversion. Instead of defending yourself against their moves, you begin to use their own behavior as the tool of their undoing. This is not escalation in the emotional sense. It is escalation in the social sense. You make their intent visible in ways they didn't anticipate. If they make a questionable remark, you frame it in a way that forces them to own it. That's an interesting thing to say. Do you speak like that in other rooms too? If they deliver a veiled insult, you unmask it with surgical calm. That sounded personal. Want to make it clearer? The aim is to put them in a position where every further move only digs them deeper. The third step is amplification. You do not need to shout or exaggerate. You simply allow their own words and actions to be seen in the right light. When you respond to them, you are not really speaking to them. You are speaking to the room, to the observers, to the network of people who will carry the memory forward. In this way, every attempt they make to undermine you becomes an opportunity to cement your frame and degrade theirs. Persistent provocateurs cannot survive long under this kind of pressure, because their power depends on operating in the shadows of subtlety. Once their tactics are visible, they lose the advantage of plausibility. The more they are forced to repeat themselves in the open, the smaller they appear. And in the game of perception, looking small is fatal. The final step is removal, not in anger, but in precision. Once they have exposed themselves enough times, you do not cut them down, you cut them out. You withdraw entirely, not just from direct interaction, but from giving them any position in which they can affect your standing. In Machiavelli's logic, the most effective punishment is not public humiliation or retaliation. It is to strip someone of relevance until they are a ghost in the room. By handling the persistent provocateur this way, you achieve two things at once. You neutralize the immediate threat, and you send a message to the rest of the room. Even those who come back for a second test will find themselves dismantled, not through noise or rage, but through the quiet exposure of their own weakness. In this way, you turn the most dangerous kind of enemy into a warning label others will read before they ever think about stepping too close. Once you have neutralized the persistent provocateur, the next evolution is not to become more aggressive or more vocal. It is to become unreadable. Predictability is vulnerability. The moment people can map your responses, they begin to design their moves around you. They don't have to overpower you if they can anticipate you. This is why in Machiavelli's world, the ruler who was easiest to understand was always the easiest to manipulate. To become unreadable is not to become mysterious in the theatrical sense. It is to remove patterns from your behavior that others can exploit. It is to hold your frame so firmly that people cannot tell when or how you will act, only that when you do, it will matter. You accomplish this by creating distance between stimulus and response, not hesitation, but deliberate spacing. When something happens, you do not rush to show your position. You watch, you listen, you let the weight of your stillness fill the air until the other person starts wondering if they miscalculated. Unreadability is built in the spaces where others expect certainty. If they expect you to challenge them every time, you sometimes let a moment pass without reaction, only to address it later in a setting they didn't expect. If they think you will remain silent, you speak suddenly, briefly, and with precision that makes the entire room turn. You shift between action and restraint, not randomly, but with calculated variety. Each shift forces people to remain on guard because they cannot build a reliable map of your behavior. The psychological effect of this is profound. When people are unsure of you, they instinctively tread more carefully. They lower their voice, they reconsider their phrasing, they measure their movements, because they do not know what might trigger your attention or your action. This caution is not the same as fear. It is something deeper. It is self-regulation in your presence, an unconscious adaptation to protect themselves from a consequence they cannot predict. Unreadability also changes the way your allies treat you. Those who respect you will adjust their own rhythms to match yours. They will take your pauses as signs of depth, your silences as signs of consideration, your sudden words as decisive. Over time, your very pace becomes the tempo of the room. The conversation bends around you, not because you demand it, but because people have learned to orient themselves to the unknown. The key to becoming unreadable is balance. Too much silence and you appear disengaged. Too much precision and you become predictable. The mastery lies in variation within consistency. The consistency of your self-control paired with the variation of your visible moves. This combination creates a presence that is both stable and elusive, the kind that unsettles opponents and steadies allies. Machiavelli would say that a ruler's greatest advantage is not strength, nor wealth, nor even loyalty. It is the ability to remain a question that no one can fully answer. Once you are unreadable, people stop testing you casually. They stop treating you like open terrain. They begin to approach with caution, not because they fear punishment, but because they respect the cost of uncertainty. And in the game of power, uncertainty is not just a shield. It is a crown. Respect is not born from being liked. Liking is a currency of comfort, exchanged easily, often without thought, and it can be withdrawn just as quickly. Respect is something else entirely. It is not about whether people enjoy your company or share your values. It is about whether they adjust themselves in your presence without being asked. Machiavelli understood this distinction with ruthless clarity. Popularity is fragile, but presence, once established, becomes a force of gravity that pulls the room into alignment around you. Presence is felt before a word is spoken. It is the shift in posture when you enter, the slight lowering of voices, the pause before someone interrupts you, if they interrupt you at all. It is the way people remember your silence as much as your speech, because both carry weight. Presence is not built through constant performance or endless visibility. It is built through moments of precision, through the restraint to speak only when the impact will echo, and through the discipline to withhold your attention when it has not been earned. Those who chase popularity bend themselves to fit the expectations of others, softening their edges, diluting their principles in the hope of being accepted. This is the opposite of presence. True presence demands that you remain exactly who you are, without apology, regardless of whether it wins favor. You are not in the room to please the room. You are there to anchor it. And that anchoring comes from a single, unshakable truth. You are not available to everyone in the same way. The paradox is that when you stop chasing popularity, your influence often grows. People begin to notice that your approval is not handed out casually, that your respect must be maintained, and that your attention is selective. This scarcity creates value. The fewer people you allow close, the more those who remain will work to keep their place. And those outside your circle will be careful in their approach, because they know there are no second chances at a first impression with you. Presence over popularity also means you are no longer reactive to every pull on your attention. You choose your moments. You let others fill the space with noise while you wait for the exact point where your voice will land like a blade. And when it does, the room feels it. People repeat your words later, not because you spoke often, but because when you did, you said something that mattered. Machiavelli would call this the discipline of selective presence. It is not about dominating the space through volume or force. It is about shaping the space through control. You decide what deserves your energy, and in doing so, you train others to measure their approach. Over time, your presence becomes its own form of silent enforcement. You don't need to remind anyone of your boundaries. They are written in the air the moment you walk in. When presence outweighs popularity, you stop playing the social game everyone else is playing. You are no longer a participant. You are the terrain they move through. And the terrain does not shift to accommodate them. It is they who must adjust to you. The average person treats disrespect as an injury. They feel it as pain, as offense, as something to heal from or retaliate against. The Machiavellian mind treats it differently. Disrespect is not a wound. It is a report. Every slight, every jab, every offhand remark carries embedded intelligence about the other person's fears, weaknesses, desires, and insecurities. If you are watching closely, each act of disrespect is like a slip of the tongue that tells you more about them than they ever intended to reveal. This is the shift that separates the strategist from the reactive player. When someone tries to provoke you, they are often revealing the place where they believe you are vulnerable. But that belief is more telling about their own mindset than about your reality. Their choice of attack exposes what they value, what they envy, or what they assume is your soft spot. And in the economy of power, knowing what someone thinks your weakness is can be more valuable than knowing their strength. Treating disrespect as data changes your posture entirely. You no longer feel the need to defend yourself in the moment, because you are no longer seeing the exchange as a fight. You are seeing it as a reconnaissance mission. Every insult becomes a map of the other person's perception. Are they attacking your competence? They may fear your capability. Are they mocking your appearance? They may be threatened by your presence. Are they questioning your integrity? They may be projecting their own lack of it. Once you begin collecting this data, patterns emerge. You start to see which people default to sarcasm under pressure, which resort to undermining others to hide their own insecurity, which test boundaries as a reflex rather than a strategy. This information allows you to decide your next moves with precision. Some offenders you will isolate quietly, knowing their pattern will eventually expose them without your involvement. Others you will use as examples, letting their own behavior confirm your assessment in front of an audience. And some you will simply erase from your proximity, because their presence adds no value and poses no challenge worth engaging. The key is to resist the urge to respond emotionally in the moment. Emotional reaction interrupts the collection process. When you take the hit without flinching, you not only preserve your position, you also signal to the offender that you are unshaken, which often prompts them to reveal even more in their attempt to get a reaction. The longer you can hold the frame without showing a crack, the more data they will give you. Machiavelli would say that an insult is rarely about its surface meaning. It is almost always a reflection of the speaker's private struggle. By training yourself to see disrespect as a message about them rather than a statement about you. You move from playing defense to orchestrating the field. You are no longer the target. You are the observer, the collector, the one building a silent archive of weaknesses and tendencies that can be leveraged at the moment of your choosing. And here is the quiet brilliance of this approach. Most people will never realize you are doing it. They will believe you let the moment pass because it didn't matter. They will assume you forgot. They will think they escaped consequence. What they won't know is that you are simply waiting for the exact time and place where using that information will have the greatest effect. And when that moment comes, it will feel to them as if the floor disappeared beneath their feet. Because the strike will not be random. It will be the inevitable conclusion of data you have been gathering all along. There comes a point when the game has shifted entirely in your favor. The disrespect has been met. The frame has been reset. The consequence has been delivered, and the data has been gathered. The offender begins to realize they miscalculated. They may try to backtrack. They may offer an apology, dressed in sincerity or disguised as humor. They may attempt to rebuild the old familiarity, testing whether the ice has thinned. Most people in your position would see this as a chance to reconcile. They would welcome the gesture, believing that closure restores stability. But Machiavelli knew that closure is not always the most powerful ending. Sometimes the most unsettling move you can make is not to punish and not to forgive, but to grant mercy without warmth. This is not reconciliation. This is not a return to the old dynamic. This is the quiet acceptance of their apology, or their attempt at one, without granting them the emotional access they once had. You are signaling, without saying it, that they are no longer a threat to you, because they are no longer relevant to you. Mercy without warmth is a statement in itself. You no longer matter in my calculations, and that message is more chilling than any retaliation could be. Retaliation implies you still see them as worth your energy. Warm forgiveness implies that you still value the relationship enough to restore it. Mercy without warmth implies neither. It leaves them in a strange limbo, technically absolved, but permanently diminished. The key is in your delivery. You do not change your tone. You do not let your expression betray anger or satisfaction. You respond with composure, as if their attempt to mend the situation is simply noted and then filed away with no further action required. You do not grant them the satisfaction of knowing they've closed the gap, nor the drama of a definitive rejection. You leave them to live in the space in between, accepted but never embraced, tolerated but never truly welcomed back in. This approach has a secondary effect. Those watching, because there are always watchers, will see that you are not swayed by emotion in either direction. You are not vengeful, but you are not soft. You are in control not just of the confrontation, but of the aftermath. Your posture says, I don't need to destroy you. I only need to remove your place in my world. And that kind of restraint builds a reputation that is harder to challenge than any display of dominance. Mercy without warmth is also a test. If the offender was sincere, they will accept the new, reduced version of the relationship without complaint. If they were not, the absence of warmth will frustrate them, often leading them to reveal that their apology was strategic, not genuine. Either way, you gain clarity without having to force it. Machiavelli would approve because this move embodies the highest principle of power. You dictate the terms of every engagement, including its end. When you show that even reconciliation happens on your terms, you remove the last vestige of their control over the narrative. And when they walk away from you after this kind of mercy, they walk away knowing something they will never admit out loud, that your absence is more powerful than your presence ever needed to be. When all is said and done, the real measure of power is not in the moment you win. It is in how long the victory holds without you having to fight again. The confrontation, the silence, the exposure, the consequence, the calculated mercy. These are all moves on the board. But their true value lies in what remains after the pieces are cleared. If the respect you've claimed evaporates as soon as the dust settles, you haven't built power. You've only borrowed it. The legacy effect is what happens when your handling of a single moment rewrites how people see you in every room you enter from then on. It is the slow crystallization of your image into something solid, something that travels ahead of you and lingers behind you. It is when people you have never met know not to cross you. It is when your name carries the weight of a warning without ever being spoken as a threat. This doesn't come from noise, it comes from consistency. You become the standard not because of one decisive act, but because every act after that reinforces the same message. I am not available for disrespect, in any form, from anyone, under any circumstance. You no longer need to prove it. Your history proves it for you. The audience effect from earlier in your journey compounds here. Stories of how you handled situations circulate, altered in detail, but preserved in essence, each one serving as a quiet reminder that you are not to be tested lightly. And the beauty of the legacy effect is that it changes the way others think about themselves in your presence. They do not just avoid disrespecting you. They elevate their own behavior when they are near you, because they know you will not engage with anything beneath your standard. Your reputation becomes a silent filter, keeping out those who cannot meet the level you have set. Machiavelli knew that the ultimate goal of any ruler was not to fight for control every day. It was to build a state where the very idea of defiance carried its own deterrent. In modern terms, this means reaching a place where your boundaries are enforced, not by your reaction, but by the collective understanding of who you are. Once you reach this point, you are no longer negotiating respect, you are defining it. But the legacy effect has one final requirement: subtraction. You must remove the need for constant defense by removing reactivity altogether. You speak when you choose, engage when it matters, and leave spaces without explanation when they no longer serve you. Your absence becomes as deliberate as your presence, and both carry equal weight. People learn that your attention is earned, not assumed, and that losing it is not something that can be undone with a single gesture. When you master this, you stop playing the short game of victories and start shaping the long game of perception. Years later, people will still measure their words with you. They will still tell stories of how you handled that one moment. They will still think twice before stepping too close to the line, not out of fear, but out of a deep, instinctive understanding that some doors, once closed, never open again. That is the true Machiavellian legacy. Not the loudest voice in the room, not the most feared, but the one whose standards have become law in the minds of others. The one who no longer needs to defend their place because the place itself has become untouchable. The one whose presence moves the room and whose absence is felt just as strongly. That is when you have won. Not when people admire you, and not even when they respect you, but when they recalibrate themselves entirely to exist in your orbit. That is when the game ends, because by then, the game belongs to you.